So empower communities. That was the real central element. And then at the same time, we came from an emergency perspective and we wanted to provide an exit strategy. You know, the first CTC pilot was implemented in Ethiopia in 2000, and the government actually gave us permission to do that because they had a history of therapeutic feeding centres for the last 15 years that they couldn't shut. People were getting stuck. They were getting dependent on these external, medicalised, high-cost centres. So they wanted to try a community-based approach. When I mean community-based, and I think this is a real level of confusion that existed then and exists now. At the base is community engagement and really a sort of a mobilisation to get the communities to understand what malnutrition is and to seek care early and to empower them to deliver that care. So mothers and their communities were at the centre of the model. And then we facilitated, we aim to facilitate that through whether it's inputs of ready-to-use food or external help with technical support or funding, coordinating different groups, but around the community. And as you see, this is another present. These are all slides I presented in 2001. So that was your base, community engagement. On top of that, we superimposed 4 other elements. Now, the supplementary feeding programs have been going for ages, treating moderate acute malnutrition. The stabilisation centres were the old therapeutic feeding centres that were the highly medicalised inpatient approach where you gave 24-hour care to children who were too sick to be treated in the community. And then the additional 2 elements we added was the outpatient therapeutic program, which was where we used the newly invented ready-to-use therapeutic foods, these nutritional pastes, to treat children who still had appetite and didn't have complications, to treat them in the community with their mothers and community being the main caregivers, not medical professionals. And at the same time, and critical, was we pushed forward with the local production of ready-to-use therapeutic food, trying to use ingredients grown locally, because we realised if we're going to address this problem over the long term, we have to integrate treatment and prevention. And this now has been recognised. I think Saul's going to talk about the Global Action Plan on wasting later, but this now has been recognised in the gap that has the interventions to strengthen food value chains in afflicted communities central to this approach. And it was, we saw the local production of a whole range of nutritional products being the way to link both treatment on the one side and prevention and food value chains on the other side. Now, the old model, this is a slide again from 2001, was the centre and the external support, whether the NGO or UN were, or even government actually, but were the centre of the programme, and then you extended, you outreached into the community. And so what happened when CMAM was adopted, and what has really happened since, in my opinion, is that there's been an emphasis on the OTP, the more medical clinical approach, albeit in the community, and the stabilisation centres, the inpatient therapeutic feeding centres that go with it. The supplementary feeding programs have been downgraded to an extent, and often they've been separated. You see the Venn diagram, they're separated off, because often we see these programs are separated from the care, and you're not getting a good continuation or continuum of care. And then community engagement's been added, but more as we better do this as well, rather than the foundation of the approach. And so we've demedicalised to an extent in that we've got treatment in the community, but we've still got a very clinically, medically driven approach. And the result is the coverage is low. Now, this was again from 2001. At that stage, coverage was about 1%. Now, we've improved. In 2020, roughly, or last year, the coverage was roughly 10 to 15%. Now, please note, the figures normally given out for coverage are 20-25% now, but they are based on prevalence. And prevalence is not the right metric to look at coverage of an acute condition where you can have multiple episodes in 1 year. Now, there's a difficulty here because we don't know the relationship between incidence of severe or acute malnutrition and its prevalence. But we know that incidence is a lot more than prevalence. And so when you say there's 25% coverage based on prevalence, likely to be under half of that. So I'm using 10 to 15 as a conservative, probably a generous estimate of coverage. So coverage is low. It was low. It's better, but it's still low. This is again from the guideline review meeting the WHO organised around CTC in 2005. When coverage is low, no matter how high your cure rate, you're going to meet only a small percentage of met needs. So you can see these two programs. The dashed line has a very, very efficacious program, very, very effective program at low coverage, and it meets under a third of the needs. The hypothetical solid line has a much less effective program, only 50%, which is actually very poor for CMAM, but it's high coverage. It addresses 70% of the population needed, and it still then meets 35% of need, a lot more than the low coverage rate. But we're at this level, we're at 10 to 15 degrees. So even if you have 100% coverage, you're only meeting 10 to 15% of the needs. So coverage is the main limiting factor. And if you look at these programs, cost is the factor that's the major barrier to coverage. And in these programs, RUTF is more than half of the cost. And so if you want to address coverage, you've got to start doing something about the cost of RUTF. And I make no apologies about going on for this and going back to the original CTC model, where the local production of RUTF from ingredients grown locally is central to the model. I think it needs to become central to the model again. This is a chart of the cost reductions that we calculated in Malawi based on the October 2020 global skim milk price. You can see that there's over a 40% reduction in the cost of ready-to-use food. On the left-hand side is the $3,626 per tonne for the peanut milk ingredients in Malawi. On the right-hand side, it's only $1,700 for locally grown soya, maize, sorghum, and the oil. And then you need the micronutrient mix. Now, you'll notice on the right-hand side, you've got a large element of cost, which is these amino acids enhanced, amino acids that we add to these recipes. Now, we did 15 years of research, and without amino acids, these recipes don't work. They don't promote recovery to the same extent as the milk recipe. At the moment, these amino acids are produced in small quantities, so they're very expensive. But as anyone in agriculture will know, giving amino acids to animals is a fundamental part of modern rearing chickens, pigs, whatever. They are low cost when they're made at scale. So we'd expect that brown bar on the right to go down considerably. So the cost of the ingredients of our amino acid enriched soy, maize, sorghum RUTF are likely to be about 50% lower than the equivalent ingredients for the milk peanut in Malawi. Now, that is a major advantage. That trial, there's been three large randomized control trials. The last one on the amino acid enhanced recipe showed that it had the same recovery rates as the milk-based recipe, had the same mortality rates. It was superior in the treatment of iron and iron deficiency anemia, which occur in the majority of cases of acute malnutrition. The only thing, it was slightly inferior in the rate of weight gain. But we don't know what the rate of weight gain means. You know, it's not a health outcome in itself. We know that in some groups, fast rate of weight gain is associated with problems later on. And we don't have any data showing the rate of weight gain and long-term outcomes. But of the primary sphere indicators, recovery, mortality, default, and coverage, this recipe was either superior in terms of coverage because it's lower cost, or the same. Unfortunately, the barriers we're facing now are even more entrenched than the barriers that we had to overcome in 2001. You know, there's still this tendency to medicalize. Whereas in 2005, when the WHO launched a review of the guidelines of treating acute malnutrition, we were invited to participate, and the data we presented from CTC, that was fundamentally in getting CMAM adopted. But as this article, I've referenced an article here, you've got the link there. At the moment, the WHO is sitting on the review of the ready-to-use food, alternative ready-to-use therapeutic foods. And the review was very different to the review in 2005. in this new review, no one who knew about amino acid enhanced recipes was allowed to participate. None of the data on cost was allowed to be shared with the review committee. And then, because the WHO decided unilaterally they didn't like, and this is in the article, they didn't like the plant-based recipes, they then didn't commission the cost-effectiveness evaluation, which was a third of the terms of reference. And so they didn't actually commission that and get external experts to look at it. So they sort of prejudged the result of the review and then tailored the evidence presented to the committee to support that prejudgment. And then the meta-analysis approach used to look at efficacy or effectiveness actually included non-amino enhanced recipes, which we knew didn't work. We'd already rejected them. It included those in pooled data with the amino acid enhanced recipes that we had data did work. And of course, if you include multiple studies that we did on non-amino enhanced recipes that didn't work with the one study we did on enhanced recipes, they got a result that say these recipes didn't work. In 1904, if the WHO had been looking at the Wright brothers flying past in their biplane, they would have concluded that mechanical flight was impossible because the previous attempts of the Wright brothers had failed, and they would have amalgamated all the data together, and whilst the Wright brothers flew past, they would have said, oh no, that's not possible. So I think, to sum up, I was asked to talk about improving access and acceptability. That's what we tried to do with CTC. And there's been lots of examples of the last 20 years that have really taken this forward. There's been the Mother's MUAC, which totally revolutionized community engagement. There's been the combined simplified protocols that simplify everything so that mothers can understand it. They use pictorial aids, and they combine both the treatment of severe acute and moderate acute. There's been the community case management, which is getting these children treated in the community and not in OTPs. These are huge advances. And there's been the plant-based amino acids RUTF. That's my timer. So there's been the plant-based amino acid enhanced RUTF recipe. These are major innovations. What we need now, we need global leadership to allow the data from these, to allow people to try different recipes and allow the data to be reviewed in an open and transparent manner so that we can move forward to lower cost and increase coverage. Thanks very much.